Fenway Rundown, Tuesday, October 28th. Chris Cotillo here, Sean McAdam also, as we get ever closer to the beginning of the Red Sox and the Major League Baseball offseason. First things first, the World Series is underway, and we pushed back our recording time a little bit this morning because we both stayed up super late to see the end of the Dodgers and Blue Jays last night. A really, really good game. One that reminded me, at least, of one that we covered almost exactly 7 years ago in 2018 with the Red Sox and the Dodgers at Dodger Stadium. But I mean, a leave it all out on the field type of legendary affair last night in Dodger Stadium.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that Max Muncy was going to be the guy to walk it off so that we could have some real symmetry. 7 years later, he, of course, beat the Red Sox and Nate Eovaldi in Game 3 back in 2018. He is the Dodger franchise postseason home run leader, and it would have sort of been fitting for him to win this one, but Freddie Freeman beat him to it. There were a couple of close calls there with Will Smith and some others hitting the ball to the warning track in the last few innings, but um, I thought Joe Davis and John Smoltz got a little punchy as the night went on, but that's understandable. There were a lot of incredible plays, great defensive plays. Tommy Edman cutting down a runner at third. First baseman Vladdy Guerrero Jr. cutting down a runner at third. Some remarkable play. A fun night. It was getting a little silly after a while as we were approaching 3 o'clock in the East, but a World Series game for the ages.
Yeah, and I think for me, like the Dodgers, they everybody talks about, you know, every piece of the puzzle that everybody knows, right? The tons and tons and tons of money, the big time free agent signings, being a destination, getting whoever they want. Last winter there was a stretch there where they were getting every guy that the Red Sox were linked to, from Teoscar to Tanner Scott, who didn't work out in year one, to Kirby Yates, and just like it was like, oh, this is super team, super team. Oh my God, super team. And then it comes down to it, and a guy named Will Klein, who I have never heard of, Sean. I don't know if you have. We do
I
this
had
for a
not.
living. Uh, a guy named Will Klein steps up and pitches like that. He was acquired, and this is I didn't know this until right now. On June 2nd, 2025, the Dodgers acquired Klein from the Mariners in a small trade for Joe Jakes, the former Red Sox lefty who's bounced around a little bit. I mean, for everything that they do and everything where they have Otani for 700 million and they gave Freeman all that money and they paid all these guys and have Snell and Yamamoto and Sasaki and everything, they also hit on guys like Will Klein, and they
Yep.
have a good,
Or
you know,
Tommy Edman.
right. Well, Tommy Edman, but like look back to the beginning of this run of guys like Muncy is a great example, and Chris Taylor is another one. And even to a lesser extent, Kike Hernandez was a guy who, kind of these are scrap heap guys around the league that have really, made an impact for them. And they just kind of churn out. It feels like, they have the secret sauce in terms of turning these almost nobodies into really good players or really good contributors. I mean, I think we've seen years of Ryan Brazier going there, right, and doing what he did a
Yep.
couple years ago after having a 7 ERA here. So it's not just the brute force of the money, and sometimes those things don't work out, right? Look at Tanner Scott's year, and is Yates on the roster? I don't think so, right?
No, neither he nor Scott.
So, Yates had an ERA of five. Tanner Scott, who we talked about at length last year, had an ERA close to five. Like, but they can find a Will Klein or they could find some of these other guys in the late innings and then make it happen. So I think, and also like there's a lot of really good homegrown players there from, um, you know, Smith
Pages.
to, and yeah, I mean, there's across the board. So, really well
I'll
run
tell you one thing.
organization. The,
I
the
don't
the money
know.
helps, but it's not all of it.
Right. And I don't know where we go from here. Obviously, game three is going to take a lot out of both teams. It's going to wreck pitching plans probably for the rest of the way. We don't know about bullpen availability for game four, which gets played tonight, or how that affects the rest of the series. But I'll tell you one thing that I don't need to see any more of. and my respect for the Blue Jays as a team has kind of gone through the roof. I thought that at the start of the postseason that they were eminently beatable. It wouldn't have surprised me if the Yankees had steamrolled over them in the division series after beating the Red Sox. I certainly expected the Yankees to win that series. They did not. Toronto hung in and took care of Seattle after 7 games, after dropping the first two at home. That's not easy to do. And the way they have fought in this series tells me a lot about John Schneider as a manager and the team they have, and sort of uh, the wherewithal that they show in that clubhouse. They're clearly not the better team here on paper in terms of talent. They're a good team, but I think anybody looking at the two rosters, given their choice, would say, "Oh, I'll take the Dodgers." And I think most people expected the Dodgers to win pretty handily. And who knows? After what happened last night, the Dodgers might win two more here and wrap it up without going back to Toronto. But got to take your hat off to what the Blue Jays have done and how hard they fought this whole month. And I expect that we have not heard the last of them.
Yeah, and I think, we talked about this with the veteran roster. I think that helps, when you have guys who have been there, done that. Scherzer, for as good as he is, as you compile a resume, I think he's the first guy to pitch in the World Series for 4 different teams, which you really think about it. And, oh, yeah, okay, I guess that did happen. And then, obviously Gaussman and some of these other guys on the pitching staff, to Guerrero setting the tone as a young leader, but, the Springers of the world and guys who have been through it. It just goes to show you, like, as the Red Sox kind of enter this window of contention, as they've been talking about, maybe it takes a few different runs to get over the hump, and you learn on the fly. And I think it speaks to the value of what, they might have experienced a few weeks ago in New York.
Yeah, and the incredible thing is that as we stay on the Jays for a minute here, is how little they've accomplished in the last 5 years. They had these perfunctory cameo appearances in the wild card round and didn't win a game and missing out. I mean, this team was in last place a year ago
Hmm.
in the division, and they turn around and win the division on a tiebreaker and get to the World Series. So it's a reminder that I think the Red Sox have their work cut out for them in the division. That seems rather obvious. The Yankees are not going away. The Blue Jays are good. We may well look back on 2025 as an aberrational year for the Orioles. I could see them being competitive again next year. There's a lot of positive reaction on their managerial hire this week. And you've got the Rays who are being sold, and maybe a ballpark and some spending to come. So the AL East has been a bear for a long time, and it's not going to change anytime soon.
Yep. All right. To the Red Sox we go. And we'll talk about a few different things. There's a little bit of news in the last week, not much. More it'll be kind of previewing what's to come in the next 5 or 6 days. The coaching staff is pretty much done, pretty much set. We know Ben Rosenthal left. John Soteropoulos is coming in as from a hitting coordinator. I don't think either of us have crazy thoughts on that hire. New voice, that's it. They like him. He'll be on the staff. Bigger news, I think, and what stuff that you had late in the week after we recorded was Jason Varitek's back. And, like, to me, this was definitely put in the bucket of nothing burger, much ado about nothing for the last few weeks. The Red Sox thought he'd be back the entire time. There really wasn't that much interest from around the league, especially if he wanted a managerial role. There was kind of I don't know, it's probably in part there's nothing going on, so this took on a little bit of a life of its own because people are dying for some sort of storyline when nothing can happen transaction wise. And, obviously when he went on EEI and had made those comments and all the different things that are going on, it seemed like it was up in the air. And the Red Sox looked at this like, just here's the contract and it's going to get done and nothing's going to happen here. So this is not earth shattering, groundbreaking. But I think, uh, just he's back, and that's not surprising at all.
Yeah. Look, and this is no disrespect to Jason, but maybe it's time to stop thinking about him as a heir apparent here or a major league manager elsewhere. The fact is that in the last 10 years, and how many managerial openings does that cover? Let's say it's an average of, 4 or 5 a year. Sometimes it's up. We had 8 or 9
Yep.
openings this offseason. There have been other years when there's only been 2 or 3, but let's average 5 or 6. We're talking about 50 or 60 managerial openings in the last decade, and he's been interviewed for one. That doesn't mean he can't manage or he's not capable, but maybe the perception of him around baseball is not what it is locally. And that's kind of understandable. He means more to this fan base for his playing career, for his leadership in uniform as a player, for the iconic moment with, the glove wash of A-Rod, all of that being, catching the no-hitters, being the team captain and catcher for 2 world championship teams. That's all well and good, but it doesn't mean much in Minneapolis or Pittsburgh or Arlington, Texas, or other places. And I think people have kind of overstated where he might impact the game elsewhere. It doesn't, again, if he were to be interviewed or get a managerial job in the next couple of years, it wouldn't be shocking, but it also wouldn't be shocking if it stayed just as it is.
Yeah, and I think, you have to look at, maybe there's that step that teams want him to take into an elevated coaching role. And, based on, the tweets from his wife about not wanting to go to just any situation geographically, maybe they're limited in what they want to do, and that's totally fine. Obviously, super comfortable here about taking on a bench coach role somewhere or a pitching coach role somewhere. Like that would be the next elevation. I have mentioned this before. Like the Red Sox have had 3 or 4 different pitching coaches, from Levangie to Dave
Dave
Bush
Bush.
to Andrew Bailey. Now they've had and the bench coach a mix and match of you know look, they had Renicky, then they had Jerry Narin for a year and that fever dream, and then they had um, Venable, and now back to Vasquez. So they've had 4 different guys in that role under the 2 managers, with Renicky taking over in 20. And Varitek, for whatever reason, whether he declined the opportunities, we don't know. Whether he's been offered them, has not been in the mix for those elevated roles. Maybe he has to take that step and kind of do that. At the same time, there's guys all over the game that haven't had to. Kurt Suzuki in Anaheim, obviously they do. They'd hire anybody, so and it's a 1 year deal, so
Yeah,
I don't know if that
I,
counts.
I don't think anybody wants that job.
Yeah, but I mean, there are like Albernaz, the guy who paid his dues on different staffs, and now is in Baltimore, and you've seen that over the course of guys getting experience in different roles. So maybe he has to do that, and maybe it's do you really want to uproot the family and leave the Red Sox after 30 years to go to Kansas City, making up a team, go to Arizona to be a pitching coach or a bench coach and to pay your dues? Maybe the answer is no. And I think that he was never interviewed here, and they've had 3 openings in the last 10 years too. Cora, then Renicky, then Cora. So not a knock, but I think just this perception that dates back to way before I covered the team, definitely during his playing career that you covered. Um, it just hasn't happened, and I think in this cycle it didn't get particularly close. The other thing, Ramon Vasquez knocked out of the Twins running. They're down to a Fab Four of guys that are not Red Sox related. So looks like the Red Sox, coaching staff is coming back in full. We touched on this earlier. We did a lot of Kyle Hudson talk, but I mean, you know, I think Breslow, the way he looked at it was, you know, get the guys he wanted in place. Obviously, Bailey was a huge piece of it for him because of their friendship and everything. Couple guys from elsewhere, see how it goes for a couple years. And I think he likes the group he has. Obviously, the infield defense could use some help. But I think if you look at it on balance with all the attrition, the fact that I just keep saying this sentence and it's a total knock on the guy, but it's not, but it just speaks to the roster. Nate Eaton started in right field in playoff games. they got to that point with the attrition, with the injuries, everything that went on, and I think the coaching staff was able to keep the group focused. So I'm not surprised that they're rewarded by all coming back, basically.
Yeah, just the one change. Ben Rosenthal does not return. Reportedly, he's interviewed for a number of major league assistant jobs and could catch on elsewhere, but otherwise, the staff is almost exactly the same. And, not a lot of turnover there.
Yep. So this is, as we sit here, we are kind of inching closer to, the Red Sox opening their offseason business. There are a few different things that are due in November, later on, as we approach the GM meetings in Vegas in a couple weeks and then the winter meetings. There's the non-tender deadline, the Rule 5 protection deadline. There's a lot of things going on. First, though, there are just, some important dates that are coming up. 5 days after the World Series, a lot of business needs to be done. The big thing for the Red Sox, of course, the opt-out decisions from Bregman, which seems like a done deal to many, and then Trevor Story. We've talked about this already a little bit. 2 years, 55 million left. I think he could leave. You think he's pretty safe to stay? I think if you had to ask, if you had to guess, I think the Red Sox are pretty cautiously very optimistic that he's going to be returning, but we don't know until we have an answer in the next few days. The other thing in that mix is figuring out Lucas Giolito and if you give him a qualifying offer. If you're the Red Sox, we talked about this a lot with Nick Pivetta last year. I think all of us looked at it and said, they're not going to give Nick Pivetta a qualifying offer because they're afraid he'll accept it. And he didn't. And it was a big reason why they were able to be comfortable, honestly, signing Bregman because they got that pick back. And then, it wasn't as bad when they had to lose one. This
Yeah,
Giolito situation, though, way more complicated. It's a mutual option that's going to be declined, but there's an injury risk, and he might take the qualifying offer. And do you have room for that? There's just a billion things. To me, I don't give it to him. Let him walk and see what happens because of the injury situation. But I could see it going either way.
Yeah, I would give him the qualifying offer. I think it's a modest raise over what he was making last year when he was healthy, which is to say from the end of April to the almost the very end of September. He was a very good number 2 or number 3 starter. I think he can be that again. There are certainly physical questions that make them pause, but they know from the examination that he had in the first week of the postseason that there was nothing structurally wrong with the elbow, that it was some inflammation. Are there some some flares or things that would give you pause? Sure. This is a guy who's already had 2 TJs essentially in his career, one coming out of high school and the other in 2024. It was the internal brace procedure, but let's just call it Tommy John for nomenclature here. To me, I don't think this is much of a decision at all. If he takes it, you just saw how difficult it is to have sufficient pitching depth throughout the year. They ran out of pitching in September. They gave the ball to a guy with 4 major league starts for the 3rd postseason game. It's a reminder that you don't need 7 or 8 starters anymore. You need darn near close to a dozen. $22 million is a lot of money, but I think that this is someone that can be a very productive number 3 starter, and that's kind of the going rate. If you went to go sign somebody with his resume for a single year, you'd come pretty close to spending $22 million. And in giving him that offer, you're protecting yourself that if he goes elsewhere, you get a pick out of it. If he accepts it, is it a little overpriced? Is there a little risk? Yes. Guess what? All pitching is a little overpriced and a little risky.
Yeah, I mean, to me, you have to, just like with Pivetta, you have to obviously offer it,
Knowing that there's the risk of him taking it.
And I think there's a pretty good, chance he does take it, and that decision due, 10 days out. So
the one thing that we haven't talked about, and it will play a role in Giolito's decision, and it will play a role in a lot of decisions this winter, is do players want to avoid being free agents a year from now? Because we know that The storm clouds are gathering, that there is almost certainly going to be a lockout, and there are people who expect that there could be considerable time missed in the 2027 season. They're going to lock out on December 1st or whatever day the CBA expires in 2026. And there will be, as happened 5 years previous, there will be no off-season maneuvering in terms of trades, free agent contracts. The business of the game is essentially shut down and will be next winter. And does someone like Lucas Giolito want to be 33, 34 years old
Right.
with no guarantee for 2027, and you're going out in a market where it could be musical chairs in February or March, where there's an agreement, okay, everybody sign quickly, and that's going to depress the market. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how that impacts this offseason.
Yeah, and I think, you have to look at, that as a factor, and also how teams play that to their advantage, right? That's going to be a big piece of this. Like, all right, well, you're going to be screwed, so here you go, and I don't know exactly, how teams are going to play that. I think some teams might look at it as a chance to get aggressive. Some teams might be willing to, you know, go extend for next year. The other thing is, you know, if you're a team that is teetering on the CBT line, or Red Sox were kind of, they were over and by enough this year. Do you just kind of not even pay attention to the CBT implications of this next season because the rules are probably all going to change heading into 27?
Yeah,
So if you're
at the very least, there'll be a reset, right?
so if you're a first time payer, which the Red Sox were, and now you're a second time, there's probably no hesitation to do that, unless, of course, as long as John Henry wants to spend that money. Um, because being a third time payer in 2027 might not exist. It'll just be some different rules. And I mean, we're talking about like the system and everything in it being uprooted potentially. So everything we talk about and the rules in which this offseason game is played completely, different
Yeah,
potentially
and
heading
let's
forward.
not rule out, although I would say it's a distinct long shot given the dynamic that exists. But we can't completely rule out the possibility that a salary cap could be in place for 2027.
Hmm.
That's what the owners desperately want, or at least a sizable number of owners desperately want. That's what this lockout is going to be centered around. The players are going to fight it tooth and nail, as they have for 60 years.
Right.
And I find it hard to believe that the union would break and allow a salary cap, but we can't completely rule that out. What happens then? Do you get grandfathered in with a portion of your previous commitments? Does everybody have to start shedding payroll to get under whatever the cap may be? Is there a phase-in system? There's so much unknown and so much still to be determined. It's going to be fascinating to see how this goes.
Yeah, and it's all done under that backdrop. It's boring as hell, but it's something that needs to be discussed and definitely is being discussed within front offices right now. With that, there is an interesting thing I want to bring up. It sounds horrible to even say, and it would be virtually impossible a year ago. Do you think the Red Sox could non-tender Tanner Houck in the next couple weeks? He is out for most of, if not all of 2026. 2027 then becomes what it is. He is, I think, at this point, um, he is under control through 2027. So 2 more years. He made 395 last year. He would make that again. To me, it's like I get the business behind it, but a year ago you were kind of, you know, latching your rotation hopes for the future onto this guy. I know what happened this year. I know he's hurt. I understand the calendar makes it, but to me, it's kind of the ultimate cheapo move to, cut
Yeah,
this guy.
I can't see $4 million coming in the way of tendering him. If he were due to make 10, 12 million, then maybe you have to sit down and think long and hard. To me, $4 million is chump change for a team with these resources, I don't think there's much debate to be made there. I would hope not, and that's not. I'm not pro Tanner Houck or anti Tanner Houck. It just seems like that's a resource that you should keep control of if it's only going to cost you 4 million down the drain. And that's what it will be. You will pay him to rehab next year. It happens. It happens to guys that you sign as free agents who are making much more than that. To me, $4 million is so modest an investment and a sunken cost that you don't even think twice. You tender him.
Yeah, and I think like the Angels did this with Sandoval last year. Like that's what the Angels do. That's what some of these franchises do. If you are the Boston Red Sox, you don't. And if they do, to free up $4 million, I think it's kind of a bad look. I mean, who knows if he's going to be able to contribute at the end of that this year? It's kind of beside the point almost. But um, it's to me, I agree with you. I do think people think it's a way of freeing up a roster spot and obviously saving a little bit of money here. Um, but I wouldn't do it. They're already kind of doing
Yeah,
that
I mean,
with
the
Lowe.
roster spot to me is, I mean, it's uncomfortable for a few months, but as soon as the season starts, you put him on the 60 and it doesn't count.
Right. So
I mean, you still have to pay him,
right.
but he's not taking up space on the 40.
The other stuff happening in the next few days, and we will, of course, have it all covered for you. The free agents are actually hitting free agency. And look, we've talked a lot on this show about Bregman, of course, and Story and Giolito kind of as the big three. The other guys that are hitting free agency for this team, Liam Hendricks, where there's virtually a 0% chance he comes back. I think, dime for both sides to going up in their separate directions there. Liam was great for business for us because he said whatever was on his mind for the entirety of 2 years. He wasn't available. He wants to continue pitching, so he will. And then the other guys that are free agents, there's four of them: Steven Matz, Justin Wilson, Rob Refsnyder, and Dustin May. To me, we talked about this already. The Red Sox need to not just bring the band back together; they need to get better. But three of those guys actually do fit the roster in complementary roles. I wouldn't re-sign Dustin May. I think he's too much of an injury risk. He showed them virtually nothing. We gave him an F on the grades pod, so that's that. Either Matz or Wilson coming back on a reasonable deal. They'll probably both make around 3-4 million. I think Wilson had a little bit better of a year. Matz was pretty good down the stretch. One of those guys makes a lot of sense unless there's, your next lefty veteran type of churn guy. And then we've talked about Refsnyder. So, those guys will hit free agency. Three of the four of them had pretty good years. We'll see if they come back, but they do fit in the roles they're in.
Yeah, and look, you could bring all three of those guys back for about 10 million bucks.
Yeah,
probably less. So they're complementary players. They're not. Refsnyder is a platoon sort of fourth or fifth outfielder, and and this is not to dismiss his on-field contributions, but about half of his value, maybe even more, is his clubhouse presence and leadership. He's part of that leadership circle there. That should not be dismissed. Wilson pitched very well against lefties, not so well against righties, struggled more as the season went on, but, not a horrible idea to re-sign him at a few million. And Matz is a little more of a length guy who can, get you 5 or 6 outs instead of 3, maybe even spot start. The importance of having depth. So I'd have no problem with bringing back any of those 3, but May, I agree, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and same with Hendricks. So, the decisions that are due, those guys will just hit free agency. The decisions that are due are, pretty simple. The Giolito qualifying offer, you figure out Story and Bregman's decision. And then, there are the Giolito and Hendricks kind of perfunctory options to be declined. That'll kick off free agency for the Red Sox 5 days after. Other things to monitor this weekend, and we will have another pod later in the week. The Gold Gloves come out Sunday. The Hall of Fame Contemporary Era ballot with Dwight Evans, something we'll get to next week, comes out on Monday. So it's starting to heat up. The time of us sitting here waiting for news is almost over. We'll have it all covered for you, of course, in the Fenway Rundown.